He paid me to be his wife for 6 months, but no contract. Prepared us for this. She signed a marriage contract with her CEO and broke every rule in his heart. All right, let us get back to our main character. The rain poured hard over the glass walls of the downtown cafe. Inside, the air smelled like roasted beans and something unspoken fear. Claire Bennett sat across from the man who had turned her life upside down in a single phone call. Ethan Hale, 34, CEO of Hale & Co., every inch of him tailored, controlled, unreadable. Between them lay a single sheet of paper and a silver ring that caught the dim light like a blade. "Marry me," he said, his voice steady as a contract clause. 6 months. You will receive full financial compensation, and your personal privacy will be protected. No affection, no attachment. Claire stared at the paper. Her reflection trembled on the surface, eyes tired from too many sleepless nights at the hospital beside her mother's bed. She was 26, one paycheck away from losing the small apartment in Brooklyn that still smelled like disinfectant and hope. She swallowed hard. "You could hire anyone for this," she whispered. Ethan's gaze did not soften. "I did not need anyone. I needed someone who will not fall in love." The words hit her harder than the thunder outside. She looked down at the contract again, her fingers tracing the line where her name should go. She was not naive. This was not a proposal. It was a transaction wrapped in elegance. But the number printed at the bottom would cover her mother's surgery and the rent for a year. Her voice broke slightly. "And if I say yes, then we sign tonight," Ethan replied. "A public ceremony next week. You will appear with me at 5 company events. You will live at my residence for credibility. And when it ends, you will walk away with your life changed completely." She hesitated. The cafe hummed around them, cups clinking, rain beating against the glass. A normal world continuing outside the storm, inside her. Finally, she reached for the pen. "I do not believe in fairy tales," she said quietly. "Good," he answered. "Neither do I." The pen scratched across the paper, a sound sharp enough to cut through the rain. When she finished signing, Ethan slid the ring toward her. "Wear it in public," he said. "Keep your story simple. We met through a friend. Fell fast, married faster." Claire lifted the ring, its cold metal pressing into her palm. It looked heavier than it should. "What if someone finds out?" she asked. He leaned back, his tone perfectly calm. "They will not, and if they do, remember one thing: feelings are optional. Rules are not." Outside, a taxi splashed through a puddle, headlights cutting across her face. For the first time that night, she realized what she had agreed to was not survival, it was surrender. Yet when she looked up, Ethan's expression wavered for just a moment, something almost human breaking through the glassy mask. Then he stood, extending his hand. "Welcome to our marriage, Mrs. Hale." Claire took his hand, the contract still warm between their palms, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered what she refused to admit: this was the moment her story truly began. The wedding happened quietly, far from the noise of cameras and gossip. A small courthouse in lower Manhattan, gray sky pressing against the tall glass windows. Claire stood beside Ethan Hale, the man she had married on paper, wearing a cream dress borrowed from the styling department at his company. The officiant read the vows quickly, almost mechanically. When he said, "You may now exchange rings," Ethan slid the silver band onto her finger with a motion so practiced it felt rehearsed. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hale," the officiant said. The words echoed in her mind like an unfinished song. Ethan turned to her with that calm, unreadable smile. "Our driver is waiting," he said softly. No warmth, no hesitation, just schedule and precision. The ride to his penthouse on Fifth Avenue felt endless. Rain streaked down the car windows, turning the city lights into rivers of gold. Claire sat with her hands folded on her lap, staring at the ring that now looked heavier than the one in the cafe. Ethan scrolled through his phone beside her, his voice occasionally breaking the silence with short instructions to his assistant through the Bluetooth earpiece. When the car stopped, she looked up. The building towered above the street, all steel and mirrored glass. Inside, The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive cologne. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft hum of motion. The doors opened to a space that felt less like a home and more like a museum. Sleek furniture, no photographs, no warmth. "This will be your room," Ethan said, leading her down the hallway. The guest suite overlooked Central Park, the windows stretching from floor to ceiling. "Dinner is at 7. We will dine together for appearance, not conversation. You can spend the day as you wish. My staff will provide anything you need." Claire nodded, her voice caught somewhere between gratitude and discomfort. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." He paused at the doorway, eyes flicking toward her. "You can call me Ethan when people are around. Otherwise, we keep things professional." Then he turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps fading into the marble floor. Left alone, Claire walked to the window. The park below looked like a patchwork of green and gray beneath the drizzle. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, the city stretching out endlessly before her. This was the life she had agreed to quiet, measured, borrowed. She whispered to herself, "You wanted stability, Claire. Here it is." That evening, the dining table stretched longer than any she had ever seen. Ethan sat at the far end, reviewing documents between bites of perfectly plated salmon. Claire tried to make small talk, but his answers came short, polite, and final. "How was your day?" she asked. "Productive," he replied without looking up. Silence returned. The ticking of a modern clock filled the space. She looked at the silverware, polished until it reflected her face like a stranger's. After dinner, she returned to her room. On the bedside table, she found a folder labeled Public Appearances. Inside were schedules, charity events, and instructions on posture, wardrobe, and talking points. She turned the first page and saw a headline mock-up, "Hale's new wife brings warmth to the empire." Her stomach twisted. Warmth was the one thing she did not feel. Across the hall, Ethan stood in his study, the city glowing behind him. He held a glass of bourbon, untouched, staring at the contract she had signed. It was simple, clear boundaries, precise obligations. And yet, for reasons he could not explain, he kept thinking about the way her voice trembled when she said, "Thank you." Claire lay awake that night, the hum of the city leaking through the windows. She thought of her mother's soft smile, of hospital machines and promises whispered in sterile rooms. She wondered if her mother would understand, if she would call this bravery or foolishness. In another room, Ethan closed his laptop and looked toward the guest wing. For the first time in years, he felt something disturb his perfect order. A thought he could not sign away, a rule already beginning to break. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the marble floors, chasing away the rain but not the silence. Claire woke early, still wearing the plain satin nightgown the housekeeper had left neatly folded on her bed. The penthouse was too quiet, too perfect. She moved through the hall barefoot, the floor cold beneath her feet, her reflection following her in the endless glass. In the kitchen, a chef was already preparing breakfast, moving with the precision of someone who never made mistakes. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," he said politely. The title made her pause every time. She nodded, murmured a greeting, and took a seat by the window. Outside, Central Park glowed in soft morning light. For a second, she could almost pretend this was real life, not a temporary chapter written in ink and legal clauses. Ethan appeared a few minutes later, already in his tailored suit. His tie was perfect, his posture rigid, every move timed like clockwork. "We have a charity brunch at 11, he said, setting down his coffee. "The press will be there. You will sit on my left. Speak only when addressed. Smile when photographed." Claire looked up, meeting his eyes. "I understand," she said quietly. He studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "You did well last night," he added, almost as an afterthought. "Thank you," she replied, surprised at the compliment, however small. Hours later, the black car slid through traffic toward the Hale Foundation headquarters. The event was held in a grand ballroom filled with donors, politicians, and photographers. Ethan guided her through the crowd with a steady hand at her back, every inch the composed CEO. Claire's heart pounded as flashbulbs burst like lightning around them. "Mr. Hale, tell us about your new wife. one reporter called out. Ethan smiled slightly, the kind that never reached his eyes. Claire has a background in marketing. She believes in the same vision as the foundation, empowering people to build better lives. Claire nodded, politely beside him, smiling for the cameras. She could feel every eye on her, weighing her worth. During lunch, she whispered to Ethan, "They do not seem to care about the cause, only about us." He glanced at her. "That is the price of power. People are more interested in stories than truth." The words stayed with her long after the event ended. When they returned home, she retreated to her room and opened her sketchbook, a small notebook she had carried since college. Lines formed under her pencil, capturing faces she had seen that day, the glint of camera flashes, the weight of her fake smile. Drawing always steadied her breathing. A knock on the door startled her. "Come in," she said. Ethan stood there, holding 2 glasses of water. "You forgot to eat," he said simply. She blinked, surprised that he had noticed. "I was not hungry," she answered. He set 1 glass beside her. "You handled yourself well today." The board was impressed. "Was that the goal?" she asked, looking up from her sketch. He hesitated. "It was necessary," she smiled faintly. "You have a reason for everything, do you not?" "Usually," he said, then looked down at her drawing. "You draw?" "It helps me think," she admitted. "Sometimes it is the only thing that makes sense." He nodded once, quietly, then turned to leave. At the door he paused. "Keep that. The world could use more people who think." After he left, Claire stared at the sketchbook for a long time. It was the first time he had said something that sounded almost kind. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his study, the city glowing beneath him. The contract lay open on the desk, her signature beside his. He touched the silver pen she had used, wondering why he had kept it. Somewhere in the quiet, he realized that the rules he had written so carefully were already starting to blur. In the guest room, Claire turned off the lamp and whispered into the darkness, "You said feelings are optional." But deep down, she knew something inside her had already started to change. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their arrangement began to take shape. Every morning, Claire and Ethan appeared together in public charity brunches, business galas, board dinners. Every evening, they returned to the same apartment, strangers sharing the same address. But something in the silence between them had started to shift. Claire adapted quickly. She memorized names, faces, and the subtle rules of high society. Her posture became more confident, her tone refined, her wardrobe transformed from thrift store modesty to elegant sophistication. Yet beneath the surface, she never forgot who she was, a woman who had traded her freedom for survival. One afternoon, the stylist brought over a series of gowns for the Hale and Co. anniversary gala. "This one," the stylist said, holding up a deep emerald dress, "will photograph beautifully under warm light." Claire nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She wondered how it would feel to wear something not for a camera, but for herself. That evening, Ethan arrived home early for the first time. He found her in the living room, barefoot, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her sketchbook open. "You do that a lot," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It keeps me grounded," she replied without looking up. He walked closer, stopping behind her. "What are you drawing?" "Faces," she said. "The ones that pretend to smile but never reach their eyes." For a moment, he said nothing, then his voice softened. "That is very accurate." She looked up, surprised. "You know that feeling too, do you not?" He gave a small nod, the kind that confessed more than words. "Every day." Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. It was not romance yet, just recognition. 2 people hiding behind different kinds of walls. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and laughter, the kind that echoed money. Cameras flashed as the couple entered, hand in hand. Ethan wore his usual calm expression, while Claire smiled with the grace of someone who had practiced it 100 times. As they approached the podium, a journalist shouted a question. "Mr. Hale, rumor has it your marriage was arranged for business reasons. Care to comment?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Claire stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Love is not a strategy," she said. It is a choice, and some choices are made before the heart even catches up. The room went silent. Then came a wave of applause. Ethan turned toward her, genuinely stunned. For the first time, his practiced mask cracked, revealing something human beneath. After the event, in the car ride home, Ethan finally spoke. "You did not have to say that." "I know," she replied. "But I meant it." He glanced at her, his tone softer now. "You have a way of saying things that sound like truth, even when they are dangerous." She smiled faintly. "Maybe truth is always dangerous in your world." That night, when they reached the penthouse, he stopped her before she could disappear into her room. "You handled yourself perfectly," he said. The board was impressed. "Was that what you wanted?" she asked. He hesitated. "It was what I needed." She nodded, turning to leave, but he called after her. "Claire." She turned. "For what it is worth," he said quietly. "Thank you." She met his gaze and saw the faintest trace of sincerity, fragile but real. "You are welcome," she said, her voice calm but trembling inside. When she closed the door behind her, Claire leaned against it, heart racing. It had been months since anyone had thanked her without a reason. Across the hall, Ethan stood alone in the dim corridor, replaying her words from the gala. For the first time, the thought of rules and contracts felt small compared to the sound of her voice. Somewhere in the silence of that night, without either of them realizing it, the contract began to dissolve one heartbeat at a time. The days after the gala felt strangely lighter. Something had shifted between them, a quiet understanding neither dared to name. Ethan no longer avoided her in the mornings. He began asking small questions about her sketches, her coffee preference, the kind of music she liked. His tone remained formal, but his eyes softened when she answered. One morning, Claire found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, trying to make coffee himself. The machine hissed and sputtered under his command. "You are going to start a fire," she said, smiling for real this time. He looked at her over his shoulder, pretending offense. "I am perfectly capable of delegating," she teased, stepping forward to take over. Her hands brushed his as she reached for the handle. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it left a spark neither of them could ignore. For a moment, they just stood there, caught between laughter and something deeper. Then Ethan cleared his throat. "The company retreat is this weekend," he said. "We will need to appear together. The staff will expect it." "Where is it?" she asked. "Upstate, a small resort near the lake." She nodded. "Do I have to give another speech?" He smiled slightly. "Only if you want to." When the weekend came, the air was crisp with the scent of pine. The resort was elegant but quiet, surrounded by autumn trees turning gold. Claire had not seen that much nature in months. As they walked along the lake shore, she paused to watch the reflection of the mountains ripple on the water. "You grew up in the city?" Ethan asked. "Not exactly," she said. "A small town in Ohio. My mother used to take me to a lake like this. We would feed the ducks and talk about dreams that never happened." He listened, hands in his pockets. "You sound like you miss it." "I do," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I had not met you that night." He glanced at her, a hint of a smile forming. "You probably would have been happier." She shook her head. "Maybe not. You taught me something I did not know about myself." "And what is that?" He asked quietly. "That I can survive anything, even you." He laughed softly, the sound surprising even himself. They walked a little further before he stopped and looked out at the lake. "You know," he said, "people think I have everything. But there are nights when I cannot remember the last time I felt peace." Claire studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "Peace does not come from control, Ethan. It comes from letting yourself be seen." He turned toward her, their eyes locking for longer than either intended. The air between them changed, warm and still. Slowly, as if afraid the world might shatter, he reached for her hand. She did not pull away. That night, at the bonfire with the staff, she caught him watching her from across the flames. His gaze lingered, not with possession, but with quiet wonder. It was the first time she had seen him look human, almost vulnerable. Later, back at the cabin, The power flickered in a passing storm. Lightning flashed through the windows, followed by the rumble of thunder. Claire lit a candle, its glow dancing over the walls. Ethan stood by the window, the storm reflected in his eyes. "You do not like the dark?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "I do not like losing control." She stepped closer, the light between them soft. "Maybe control is overrated," she whispered. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. "Claire," he began, but the words failed. Instead, he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The world went silent, except for the sound of rain. They did not speak after that. They just stood together, close enough for silence to say what words could not. And as the candle flickered out, both of them knew that something had changed forever. The following week, New York returned to its usual rhythm, loud, hurried, and indifferent. But inside the penthouse, everything felt different. Claire and Ethan spoke more often. Now, their conversations no longer limited to schedules and appearances. The silence between them had become something gentler, almost comfortable. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Ethan found Claire sitting on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. He leaned on the railing beside her, tie loosened, exhaustion etched across his face. "You hate small talk," she said softly without turning. He smiled faintly. "And you hate pretending. Maybe that is why this works," she said. "Neither of us believes in illusions." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You would be surprised how much of my life depends on illusion." "Then maybe it is time to live differently," she replied. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you ever regret signing that contract?" Claire turned to meet his gaze. "I regret why I had to, but not what came after." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Ethan's expression shifted, something breaking through the wall he had built around himself. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the table inside. He glanced at it, his legal advisor. With a sigh, he stepped away to answer. The next morning, the illusion she had mentioned began to crack. Headlines exploded across business news outlets. Hale marriage, scandal leaked documents, reveal contractual union. Claire's phone buzzed endlessly with notifications. Her face was on every screen. Phrases like fake wife, fraud, and corporate manipulation scrolled past in cruel rhythm. When she looked up, Ethan was standing in the doorway, his phone in hand, jaw clenched. "It was leaked," he said flatly. "By who?" she whispered. "My former PR director," he replied. "He was fired last week for taking bribes from a competitor. This is his revenge." Claire's throat tightened. "And what happens now?" "The board wants me to address it publicly," Ethan said, running a hand through his hair. "They want a statement denying everything." "And what about me?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice lowering. "You stay silent. The less you say, the better." Her eyes widened. "So, you want me to pretend again? To disappear so your company survives?" "This is not about pretending," he said sharply. "It is about control." Claire stepped back, shaking her head. "Control is all you have ever cared about, Ethan, even when it costs you everything else." For the first time, anger flashed across his face. "Do you think I wanted this? I built a life where no one could hurt me, and then you walked in and made me feel again. That was never part of the plan." She stared at him, her chest tight. "Maybe you should have written that into the contract too." Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. The next day, the press swarmed outside the Hale building. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, questions overlapping in chaos. Ethan stood behind the tinted windows of his office, watching the storm he had helped create. Down on the street, Claire's name was being dragged through the headlines, while she stayed inside her room, packing the few things that were truly hers. That night, Ethan returned home to find her suitcase by the door. "Where will you go?" he asked, voice barely steady. "Somewhere quiet," she said. "Somewhere no one knows me." He wanted to stop her, to say something that would make her stay, but the words never came. When the elevator doors closed behind her, the silence left behind was heavier than the city itself. Ethan stood alone in the living room, the faint hum of the rain outside the only sound. He looked down at the silver pen on his desk, the same one she had used to sign the contract, and whispered, almost to himself, "What have I done?" The answer came from the echo of her voice in his memory, soft but certain. "You cannot control everything." And for the first time, he wished she had been wrong. The week that followed was a blur of headlines, statements, and silence. Ethan Hale stood before his board, defending a company that no longer felt like his own. Reporters filled the lobby of Hale & Co., shouting questions he refused to answer. Every time he opened a newspaper, Claire's face looked back at him, haunted, misunderstood, alone. He had done what the board demanded. At the press conference, he had confirmed the marriage as a contractual arrangement, calling it a private matter misrepresented by the media. The words were clean, professional, and utterly cold. But when he saw her name trending beneath his, guilt settled like a weight in his chest. At night, the penthouse echoed with emptiness. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the hall, a ghost that refused to leave. He tried to focus on reports and deadlines, but every page blurred into the same thought. She had walked away because he had let her. Across the city, Claire stayed at a modest apartment near the hospital where her mother was finally recovering. She spent her days volunteering in the art therapy ward, sketching with patients who had lost their voices to trauma. When people recognized her from the news, she smiled politely and said nothing. She had learned the power of silence. One evening, while cleaning her sketchbook, she found the silver pen Ethan had given her that first night. It had rolled into the pocket of her coat during the move. She turned it in her fingers, remembering his voice, "Feelings are optional, rules are not." But she had learned the truth, rules could be rewritten. Meanwhile, Ethan's company stock began to drop. Investors questioned his credibility, and the board whispered about replacing him. His assistant mentioned that Claire had been seen at the hospital again, working quietly, helping children paint. That night, Ethan sat alone in his study, staring at the contract she had signed. Her signature, steady, graceful, felt like an accusation. He picked up the silver pen and traced the line beneath her name. "You kept your promise," he whispered. "I am the one who broke mine." The next morning he called his driver and said only one sentence, "Take me to Westbridge Hospital." When he arrived, he saw her through the window of the therapy room. She was kneeling beside a little girl, guiding the child's hand with a brush dipped in blue paint. Claire laughed softly, and for the first time in months, he saw her as she had been before all the lies, kind, alive, real. Ethan stood in the doorway, uncertain if he had the right to enter. But when she finally looked up and met his eyes through the glass, the room seemed to still. He did not smile, and neither did she. Yet in that moment, both of them understood the contract was over, but their story was not. Ethan did not enter the room that day. He simply watched her until the nurse turned off the lights and the children left. When Claire finally stepped outside, the evening sun painted the hospital walls gold. She stopped when she saw him standing by his car, suit immaculate as always, but eyes softer than she remembered. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. He took a slow breath. "Because I am done hiding behind contracts." Claire crossed her arms, her tone guarded. "You already said everything that needed to be said. The world heard it." "I said what they wanted," he replied, voice low. "Not what was true." She hesitated. "And what is the truth, Ethan?" He stepped closer. "That I was wrong, that I let fear turn love into a transaction. And that I am not asking for forgiveness, I am asking for a chance to make it right." She looked at him for a long moment, the city noise fading around them. "Words are easy for you," she said softly. "They always have been." "Then let me show you," he said. 2 days later, the world watched as Ethan Hale interrupted his company's live investor broadcast. Standing on the stage, without a teleprompter or a script, he faced the cameras and the crowd. "I built this empire on control," he began, his voice echoing through the hall. "But control cannot replace conscience. The woman I hurt is not a contract or a scandal. She is the reason I remembered who I was before I cared about power." Gasps rippled through the audience as he continued. "Her name is Claire Bennett, and if you are watching this, Claire, Know that I do not want to own your silence. I want to earn your trust. The feed went viral within minutes. Some called it madness, others called it redemption. But for the first time, Ethan did not care about the outcome. That evening, Claire watched the recording on her phone. Her hands trembled, tears welling before she could stop them. She turned off the screen and stared at the city skyline outside her window. The same man who once told her feelings were optional had just confessed to the entire world that they were not. Later that night, she returned to the hospital's rooftop garden where she often went to think. The air smelled of rain, and the city lights shimmered below. She did not hear his footsteps until he was beside her. "I thought you might be here," Ethan said quietly. "It is where truth finds you." Claire faced him, eyes glistening. "Why would you risk everything?" He smiled faintly. "Because you were never a risk. You were the reason." The silence stretched between them, fragile but full of possibility. When he reached into his pocket and held out the same silver pen she had used to sign their contract, her breath caught. "This time," he said, "no papers, just one question." Claire stared at him, the city reflected in her tears. "What question?" He met her gaze steadily. "Will you choose me without the rules, without the lies?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward, placing her hand over his. "Maybe love is not about choosing once," she whispered. "Maybe it is about choosing again, when it hurts the most." And as the city lights flickered around them, she finally said, "Yes." 1 year later, the story that had once filled headlines had faded into a quiet legend. Ethan Hale had stepped down as CEO of Hale & Co. and founded the Hale Foundation for Art and Education, dedicating part of his fortune to support hospitals and struggling artists. The first project under that name stood in a converted warehouse downtown, an open gallery filled with sketches, colors, and stories of healing. At the entrance hung a single framed drawing, a woman's hand holding a silver pen. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The Art of Second Chances." Claire walked through the gallery that afternoon, her heart steady, her hands smudged with charcoal. Children from the hospital ran past her, laughing as they painted on the community wall. This was her new life, one she had built from truth, not pretense. She paused when she saw Ethan standing near the far window, watching the crowd with quiet pride. He still wore the same calm expression, but the distance in his eyes was gone. "You started a whole foundation just to prove a point," she said, smiling softly. He turned to her. "Not to prove a point," he replied. "To keep a promise." She laughed lightly. "Which one?" "The one I made the night you said yes." Claire stepped closer, her gaze meeting his. "You really meant it, did you not?" "I did," he said. "Every word." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, the light from the skylight glimmered against a new ring, simple, elegant, real. "The first time, I gave you a contract," he said. "This time, I am giving you a choice." Her breath caught as he lowered himself to one knee. "Claire Bennett," he said, his voice steady. "Will you marry me for real, without rules, without fear, without an end date?" Tears filled her eyes. Around them, the noise of laughter and music faded into the background. "I think," she whispered, "I already did." The crowd erupted in soft applause as he slipped the ring onto her finger. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Outside, the city moved as always. Taxis, noise, 1,000 stories rushing by, but for them, time slowed. Later that evening, as the gallery lights dimmed, Claire stood beside the framed drawing at the entrance. She looked up at the words again. "The Art of Second Chances." Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You know," she said, smiling, "it started as a signature and ended as a promise." He finished. They stood there in silence, watching the reflection of the city lights ripple across the glass. What had begun as a transaction had become something that no contract could contain, a love rewritten in its own handwriting. And as the final lights faded from the gallery, Ethan whispered, "No more rules." Claire smiled, her fingers entwined with his. "Only forever."